According to court documents, give a glimpse into what happened on the freeway Thursday morning and how police tracked down the man who they have charged with the road rage killing.
One gunshot, fired on a crowded highway during rush hour, and the man who pulled the trigger didn't stop. He didn't call for help. He just merged back into traffic and drove to work like nothing happened. Before we get into this, if you're new here, this is Crime Files. And if you like what we do, hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss the next case. Now, let's talk about LaTavia Davis. It was a Thursday morning in mid-August, still dark enough that headlights mattered, and I-20 eastbound in Fort Worth was doing what it always does around 6:30 in the morning, filling up fast with people trying to beat the clock to work. LaTavia was one of them. She was 34 years old, and she worked as a teacher's aide at Ray Elementary School, part of the Everman Independent School District just outside Fort Worth. If you've ever had a teacher's aide in your kid's classroom, you know that job isn't glamorous, but it's the kind of role that quietly holds a classroom together. Parents who knew her describe her as warm and encouraging, the kind of person who actually connected with the kids she worked with. One mother later said Davis had worked closely with her daughter, helping nurture her daughter's love of art, and that the loss hit their family hard even though they weren't related to her at all. That's the kind of impression she left on people. Outside of work, LaTavia was just as present in her community. She was deeply involved at the Vision Church of Fort Worth, a small church on Mansfield Avenue. She sang in the youth choir. She worked with the children's ministry. She did outreach for people experiencing homelessness in the area. People at her church called her TT. And according to friends there, the nickname captured her personality perfectly. Someone with a bit of fire in her, but also goodness and a kind of quiet steadiness. When she was needed, she stepped up. That's not something people say about everyone. That's something people say about someone who actually showed up. She had a sister and 2 younger brothers, and her family described her as someone with real plans for her future. Someone who was still building the life she wanted. That detail matters, because it's part of what makes this case so hard to sit with. This wasn't a life that had already played itself out. She was 34, working a job she seemed to care about, active in her church, present for her family, and on an ordinary Thursday morning, driving the same highway she probably drove all the time, all of that got cut short in the span of a few seconds. Here's where the questions start piling up. Because what happened on I-20 that morning wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a target attack. It wasn't anything with an obvious motive at all. Investigators would later say it started as something almost unbelievably small. Something that happens on highways across the country every single day without anyone getting hurt. So, how does an ordinary morning commute turn into a homicide investigation with the interstate shut down for hours? And why did the driver responsible seem to think he could just keep going, get to work, and let the whole thing disappear behind him? That's where we're headed next. The morning of August 13th, 2026, started like any other for thousands of Fort Worth commuters. I-20 eastbound near Trail Lake Drive, close to Granbury Road, was packed the way it always is during rush hour. Somewhere in that stream of cars was LaTavia, heading toward her job at Erie Elementary. And somewhere near her, in a separate vehicle, was a 37-year-old man named Lapaul Lawrence. According to police, Lawrence had just left an apartment near South Hullen Street, and I-20 that morning. What happened between his car and LaTavia's isn't fully clear, and that's important to say plainly, because we don't actually know who did what first. What we do know, based on witness accounts and Lawrence's own statements to police, is that some kind of road rage situation developed between the 2 vehicles as they traveled east. Lawrence later told investigators that he was trying to merge into the right lane when LaTavia began tailgating him. He said he saw her red sedan cut across lanes toward the left side of the highway. Now, if you drive regularly, you know how fast tempers can flare in a moment like that. Tailgating, lane changes, someone riding too close. It happens constantly, and the overwhelming majority of the time, people flash their lights, maybe lay on the horn, mutter something under their breath, and move on with their day. That's what should have happened here, too. Instead, according to what Lawrence told police, he pulled out a 9mm pistol and pointed it at her car. And then he fired. One shot. That's it. One single round. Fired from one moving vehicle into another, in the middle of morning rush hour traffic on a major interstate. Lawrence told officers he saw the bullet strike the passenger side window of her car. And here's the detail that I think really sits with people the wrong way. After firing that shot, Lawrence didn't stop. He didn't pull over. He didn't call 911, according to his own statement. He took the exit near Granbury Road and continued on to his job in Justin, Texas, a town northwest of Fort Worth. He left the scene of a shooting, drove past the aftermath he just caused, and went to work. Meanwhile, LaTavia's car came to a stop on the highway with her still inside, wounded. Fort Worth police got the call just before 6:40 that morning. When officers arrived, they found her with a gunshot wound. Paramedics tried to save her. According to the arrest affidavit, she was pronounced dead at the scene at 6:52 a.m. 3 separate witnesses had stopped to try to help her. Think about that for a second. In the chaos of shooting on a packed interstate, with traffic backing up and confusion everywhere, there were still people who pulled over, who got out of their cars, who tried to do something. Police later publicly thanked those witnesses for rendering aid. But the man who caused all was already gone, merging back into the normal rhythm of a Thursday morning commute, as if he could simply drive away from what had just happened. For those first few hours, Fort Worth police didn't know who they were looking for. What they had was a chaotic scene, a dead woman in her car, and a highway that needed to be shut down for investigation. The eastbound lanes of I-20 stayed closed most of the morning and didn't reopen until early afternoon, which tells you how seriously investigators were treating the scene. Officers processing the area found a fired shell casing, a 9mm Winchester cartridge, near the Granbury Road exit. That casing mattered. It wasn't just physical evidence sitting on the pavement. It was a thread that connected directly back to whoever pulled that trigger. But a shell casing alone doesn't give you a name. Witnesses told police they'd heard a loud bang, then saw a vehicle, described as blue with its window down, driving toward the exit right after sound. That was something. It wasn't everything. This is usually where cases like this get stuck. A driver who doesn't stop, no name, no confirmed vehicle registration, just a color and a direction of travel. In a lot of hit-and-run investigations, that's where the trail goes cold. Sometimes for weeks, sometimes forever. But investigators caught a break, and it came from an ordinary piece of technology that a lot of us don't think twice about: a stranger's dash cam. A witness driving nearby that morning had dashboard camera footage that captured a license plate, and it captured the vehicle involved in the incident. That plate number gave Fort Worth police exactly what they needed to start closing in on a suspect. Investigators pulled together a team that included patrol officers, the homicide unit, the real-time crime center, an operation and surveillance team, and even a recruit class, all working the case together. Within hours of the shooting, that combined effort led them to a name: Patrick Lapaul Lawrence, 37 years old. And they didn't just identify him. They found him. Detectives tracked him to his workplace in Justin, Texas, the same place he told police he'd been driving to that morning after the shooting. Think about the timeline here. A man fires a single shot into another driver's car during morning rush hour, leaves the scene, drives roughly 30 minutes northwest, and clocks in at work as if it's a completely normal day. Meanwhile, less than a county away, police are shutting down a major interstate, processing a homicide scene, and piecing together his identity from a stranger's dashcam footage. By Thursday, the same day as the shooting, Fort Worth police had announced his arrest. Lawrence was taken into custody and charged with murder. He was booked into the Lon Evans Correction Center, with bond set at $300,000. What's striking about the speed of this arrest is what it says about how quickly digital evidence can undo the idea that you can simply drive away from something. Lawrence apparently believed that once he left that highway, the incident was behind him. But a witness's dashcam had already captured what he thought no one saw, and that single piece of footage became the turning point in the entire case. So by the end of that first day, police had a suspect in custody and a murder charge on the books. But that's really just the beginning of the legal process, not the end of the story. And it leaves us with the questions that matter most, the ones that go beyond who did it and start asking why and what happens now. Once Lawrence was in custody, The picture investigators had assembled came from two main sources: the physical evidence at the scene and Lawrence's own statements to police. And it's worth pausing on that second part, because in a lot of cases like this, suspects deny everything, lawyer up immediately, and give investigators nothing to work with. That's not what happened here. According to the arrest affidavit, Lawrence essentially walked detectives through his version of events himself, describing the tailgating, describing pointing the gun, describing seeing the bullet hit her window, describing leaving the highway to go to work. That raises an obvious question that true crime viewers always end up asking in cases like this. Why would someone explain all of that to police instead of staying silent? We don't know what was going through his mind in that interview room, and it would be irresponsible to guess at his motivations or his state of mind. What we can say is that his own account is a major part of what the case against him rests on. Legally, this is still in an early stage. Lawrence has been charged with murder, but as of everything publicly reported, he had not yet been indicted by a grand jury, which is typically the next major step in a Texas felony case like this. Because the case is still working its way through the courts, the charge remains an allegation, and Lawrence is legally presumed innocent unless and until he's proven guilty. That's not just a formality we're required to say. It's actually relevant here, because the full legal picture, including any potential self-defense claim, still hasn't played out in court. And that's actually the tension at the center of this whole case. Lawrence's own account describes a version of events where he felt threatened, where LaTavia's car was allegedly cutting across lanes toward him. Whether that rises to any kind of legal justification for firing a gun into another person's car on a public highway is something that will be argued out in a courtroom, not something we can determine from arrest documents and news reports. What we do know is how this ended for LaTavia. On the same church grounds where she used to sing in the youth choir, her community gathered about a week after her death for an emotional service at the Vision Church of Fort Worth. Her sister stood up and read a letter she'd written, her voice breaking as she spoke about still expecting to hear LaTavia's voice, still expecting this to somehow turn out to be a dream. Other members of the church talked about who LaTavia really was beyond this headline, the woman who did outreach for the unhoused, who mentored kids, who people described as bringing fire and goodness into every room she walked into. Everman ISD released a statement, too, saying they were deeply saddened by the loss of a valued staff member and offering counseling support to students and employees who needed it. It's a reminder that this wasn't just one family's loss. It rippled outward into a school, into a church, into a whole community that knew her. So where does that leave us? A single decision, made in a matter of seconds on a crowded highway, took a woman's life and upended dozens more. It leaves us with real questions worth sitting with. What actually happens in someone's mind in those few seconds between feeling cut off in traffic and deciding to raise a gun? How many of us have felt that same flash of anger behind the wheel? And what separates that moment from this outcome? And when someone drives away and goes back to an ordinary day, work, routine, normalcy, what does that tell us about how people process something they've just done? We'll be watching to see how this case moves through the courts, and we'll update you when there's more to report. If this case affected you the way it affected us, let us know what you think happened in that split-second decision down in the comments. And if you want to stay with us for cases like this one, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Files with notifications turned on, so you don't miss what we cover next.